Hello everyone. In this video session, we are going to focus on Chapter 7, Research Ethics. First of all, let's have a look at the outcomes of this unit. At the end of the unit, you will comprehend the nature and meanings of research ethics. You will develop a critical understanding of the historical background of research ethics, and at the end of this unit you will distinguish between the 6 major ethical perspectives, and you will also differentiate between the 3 major ethical principles, and finally you will recognize the unique characteristics of qualitative research in relationship to research ethics. First of all, to understand research ethics, we need to have a brief look in the literature of it. In the literature, it's not easy to find a single or agreed definition of the term research ethics, but in a general way, it is defined as a set of ethical principles that should be taken into consideration when doing social research. In a way, research ethics is a matter of judgment and evaluation in terms of what is wrong or what is true, or good or bad. It's a kind of evaluation of this. And the most influential theoretical frameworks about the research ethics are deontological and consequentialist ethics perspective. When we have a look at their definition, deontological perspective judges researchers' actions according to some absolute universal duties requiring certain types of action. They have certain principles, and they evaluate researchers' actions based on these universal principles. In consequentialist perspective, it evaluates researchers' actions according to their consequences. At the end of the research, they look at the results, they look at the conclusion of the research, and they evaluate the researcher's action based on the consequences. In utilitarianism, it judges actions of researchers according to which they produce most happiness or utility for the participants. But when we look at all, the most important aim of research is to protect participants from all kinds of risks. They have a mutual principle. When we look at the brief history of research ethics, we can date back to 1947, in which we have the Nuremberg Code. In it, they outline some basic ethical principles. We also have the World Medical Association's Helsinki Declaration of 1964. We also have the National Commission of Belmont's report of 1997 in the US. And all of these research codes, all of these reports and declarations, they lead to the production of some ethic codes. However, in the story of it, in the historical perspective, we also have several examples in which these research ethics and codes were violated. We have some examples such as the Little Albert experiment in 1920, the Nazi experiments during the World War between 1939 and 1945, and the Milgram obedience experiments between 1960 and 1963, and the Zimbardo prison experiment in 1971. They are all the research studies which had some ethical problems. And what was the problem in those studies in terms of the research ethics is that the research had some misconduct. For example, they had the fabrication problem, which means they made up the data or results or reporting them. For example, there was not such a conclusion, such a result or such a finding, they just made it up. Unreal data, they presented unreal findings. And some of them had the falsification, in which they manipulated research materials, equipment, or processes. They changed the data, they omitted some of the results, they did not present the findings fully. They changed some of the variables and some of the data. They falsified their research process. Or in some of them, we can see plagiarism, which is the appropriation of another person's ideas, process, results, or words as if they were yours. The ideas, the results, do not belong to you, but you present them as if they are yours. So this fabrication, falsification, and plagiarism problems were in those studies, and they led to research misconduct. You already remember I mentioned about the ethical perspectives such as deontology, consequentialism, and utilitarianism. In addition to these three main perspectives, we also have principle-based ethics, which is also called principalism, which is based on four main principles in terms of ethics. The first one is respect for the autonomy, which means your participants should have their own decision-making process to participate your study or not. They decide on their own. The other one is beneficence. It refers to the obligation to provide benefits and to balance them against risks. Number three is non-maleficence. It is the obligation to avoid causing harm. And final one is the justice. It is the obligation of fairness in the distribution of benefits and risks. This principle-based ethics is based on these four principles. We also have situation-based ethics, which is called as the situationism, and it refers to the unique circumstances or features of a particular research context, and these unique features determines whether your research is good or bad, is ethical or non-ethical. They think that the research should be evaluated based on the features of a specific situation. And we have virtue ethics, which treats the character of researchers as the primary focus of ethical evaluation. They think that the values, the character of the researcher is important in evaluating whether a research is ethical or not. And we also have relational ethics, and it criticized other research perspectives and suggests that researchers ought to see people as social beings, and their relationship with their social environment determines whether the research is ethical or not. And in terms of ethical principles, these were the perspectives I mentioned, some universal perspectives, and we also have some ethical principles. And in the literature, there are different categorizations of ethical principles. For example, Immanuel Wendler and Christian present 7 principles of ethics. Christian's 2005 present 4 principles of ethics, which are informed consent, deception, privacy and confidentiality, and accuracy. On the other hand, Bell and Bryman 2007 presents 11 principles. But in general, when we look at all these categorizations, in general, we have 3 most widely recognized ethical principles in international guidelines. The first one is autonomy and informed consent, which means the participants should be informed and they need to have the opportunity to make their own decisions. Second one is balancing research risks and benefits. Based on this principle, risks and benefits are taken into consideration, and we need to, as researchers, we need to maximize possible benefits and minimize possible risks. And number 3 is privacy, anonymity, and confidentiality. It is in a way protecting and not revealing both personal territory and information. They think that personal information should be kept as a secret in research process. In qualitative research, the ethical concerns are a little bit different. For this reason, we need to have a special focus in qualitative research, because several ethical dilemmas that they may deserve some special attention. First of all, in qualitative research, it's not always possible to predict all possible questions and responses. Secondly, the nature of relationship between the researcher and the participants is different than quantitative research, and it's amenable to some sensitive disclosures. In number 3, the process in qualitative research can make it a little bit different for participants to voice their concerns, because they are at the center And you remember in qualitative research, the number of participants is limited and they're at the center of the research, and that might make the process a little bit difficult for the participants to voice their concerns. And finally, the participants' identities are generally known to researchers. You remember there were a small number of participants, and even the researchers have the opportunity to choose their participants in qualitative research, so their identity is familiar to the researcher, and that might be a little bit complicated in terms of the boundary issues. And in qualitative research, we also have an important term which is called reflexivity, and this is defined as the process of critical reflection both on the kind of knowledge produced from research and how that knowledge is generated. And in that sense, as researchers, we need to have our self-reflexivity, and we also have participant reflexivity as a representation of the participant voice, and we need to have finally the radical reflexivity as a representation of shared voices between researchers and the participants. And in this video session, we briefly focused on the historical review of research ethics. We analyzed the perspectives in research ethics, and we touched upon the ethical principles. And finally, we focused on ethics in qualitative research.